Hi, I'm Rachel Kramer Bussel. I'm editor-in-chief of Residence 11, which you can find at residence11.com. We're a website and community that celebrates sensuality, romance, intimacy, and loving in a new age of human connection. This is part of our monthly author series, and today we're talking to Samantha Cole, who's the author of How Sex Changed the Internet and the Internet Changed Sex. And Samantha is a senior editor for Motherboard, Vice Media's science and technology outlet, where she covers sexuality, online culture, platforms, and the adult industry. Sam's decade in journalism spans from hyperlocal newspapers to national and international outlets, including Popular Science, Fast Company, and Al Jazeera. In 2020, she was nominated for a Writers Guild Award for Best Digital News Coverage. And in her spare time, Sam can be found biking around Brooklyn, stress baking, and spelunking into internet subcultures. Learn more about Sam at samleecole.com or on Twitter or Instagram at samleecole. And make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're watching this so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming interviews. So before I get to your book and sex tech and all of that, I want to go back a little and ask you, what did you learn about sex or sex and technology growing up, whether like officially, formally, or informally?
Yeah. I mean, I had a pretty sheltered upbringing. My childhood was pretty, it was pretty religious. I was homeschooled for a bit. So, it was not a lot of sex education happening in general. But yeah, I think maybe that's probably why I'm so curious about these topics as an adult. But yeah, I mean, I didn't come across porn on the internet or anything like that until I was probably in my late teens. I was big into like reading. I mean, I was curious about like my body and stuff. So I was reading like Scarletine when that was a thing. And I guess it still is a thing. But I was reading, like the kind of like the good, like I was doing my research, citing my sources type sex ed on the internet. I was a little bit scared of the Wild West at the time. And this would have been, in the 90s. So it was a lot out there that I could have stumbled across, but just was like, not ready for it yet. But yeah.
Actually leads me to my first question, which is, well, I guess, were you scared of it because of the things that you were told by your family or school, or was that, and you talk in the book about these moral panics over sex, especially sex online. There was a Time magazine cover story on cyber porn, which sounds so dated now.
Yeah.
Right, that cover story presaged the breathless fear around sex and sexuality on the internet. So I'm curious, how that played into your curiosity and also your, I guess, fears about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was getting a lot of like abstinence only sex education is, I guess, what it was. So yeah, it was very much like, you should save yourself till marriage. You shouldn't, tempt the boys with sinful thoughts. Your body is, not your own. It belongs to God and men, basically. So yeah, I was very, afraid of kind of straying too far from that sort of messaging, because the stakes were like, are you going to go to hell or not? It was very fire and brimstone type messaging. But yeah, it was during that time where, we were talking about, cyber porn as this big panic that was happening, which is so funny. I don't think anyone calls it cyber porn anymore. I think it's just porn. But yeah, it kind of shows how new and scary this was to a lot of people at the time. I think in the 90s, this big fear about this new technology coming into people's homes, literally for the first time. It was something that was accessible maybe at the office or at a library or something, and then suddenly everyone could have it in their house. And this kind of fear and confusion about what kids could access, especially, and how kids might be looking at things online that they shouldn't be, or they're being exposed to explicit images too young, which is like a valid fear, but it was also very much overblown, I think, for what was actually accessible at the time. And this was following years of panic that was happening already about like offline porn. So anti-porn feminists were very much kind of beating that drum about, porn is violent and misogynistic and all this stuff. And they wanted to get it, shut down as many places as possible. And the internet became a new frontier for that kind of control over pornography and, sexual education. So yeah, I mean, it was a weird time. I don't think I was super aware of like all of these kind of like cultural things happening at the time, but it was in the air. It was, this is this kind of weird new thing that we're all on. We're all on AIM. We're all, talking to strangers, stranger danger, don't give out your address. Just so funny to think about today, because it's like you have to give out your phone number 10 times a day just to get, a coupon for a website. Very different than it used to be.
I'm curious how you think that panic has morphed, because as you were talking, I was thinking about, I forget what state it is, but aren't they trying to pass a law to ban porn in certain states now in 2023? I mean, I'm not sure. I've read a little bit of it, but I don't know exactly how it's going to work. But those fears seem to obviously are still around.
Yeah, they're still around, and I would say they're even worse than they probably used to be. It was very new and scary, and then people kind of chilled out, and now it's gotten ramped up again. So yeah, I mean, I think Utah was one of the first to enact these laws that say you can't access porn without age verification, which sounds like a good idea. It sounds like a common sense idea, but there's no kind of infrastructure or technology built to make that happen for a lot of websites. So it's effectively making it impossible to exist as an adult website unless, you're prepared to get sued a whole bunch, which a lot of sites aren't. So yeah, there's this big kind of push toward age verification that's happening right now. That's really what's behind it is, censorship of adult content for adults. Yeah.
And you talk in the book about that censorship that's happening across various platforms, from social media to payment processors that don't allow transactions related to sex work, as well as anti-sex work laws like FOSTA and SESTA. Can you talk about why you think things are becoming more restrictive? Like, does it have to do with prudery, or is it the tech companies trying to protect themselves, or both?
I think it's kind of both. I think, one causes the other a little bit. A lot of these laws that are put in place now are, they're focused on stopping sex trafficking online, which again no one disagrees with that. That's a great kind of mission, but the way that they're implemented is too broad, too vague, and it's catching consensual adult activity, consensual, free speech, all these things that, expression online in this net. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to, kind of the upbringing that I had, where you use this kind of brand of evangelical Christianity that wants to kind of say no to all porn, no to all kind of what we see as exploitative, which is, any kind of adult activity online. And then that kind of bleeds over into pressure put on the banks to not serve these websites because they're being accused of exploitation. And then that pressure trickles down to the platforms, which can no longer pay people or themselves. So yeah, it's kind of a long chain of censorship happening. That's kind of, it's gotten worse in recent years, I think, since, 2018, 2019, when FOSTA SESTA passed, like you mentioned, which was one of the first like big anti-trafficking bills to succeed.
As you were talking, I was thinking about how sex education, I think, has also gone downhill for many people in the last 20 years. But now there's also, it seems, especially in politics, there's a lack of tech education.
Yeah.
People are passing laws, but there's not a way yet to enact them. So it seems like tech companies are kind of caught in the middle. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, I think it's all combined with this political ideology that's problematic too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's it's kind of the pressure from conservative right-wing groups to kind of say all adult stuff is bad, and then what gets caught in that a lot of the times is sex education, which, you have to talk about, bodily anatomy and sex and, how to use birth control, how to put on a condom, things like that. It's like, these are things that, we used to kind of get in schools way back when and just don't anymore, because the state of, sex education, especially in public schools or, also in private schools, is pretty abysmal, because, there's this fear of like, oh, we're going to influence kids into having sex too soon or something. It's like, no, you're actually just preparing them to be safe. So yeah, it's scary. It's like you said, it's, it's the illiteracy about tech from people who are making these laws about tech, who don't seem to even understand how Wi-Fi works. And then, they're making laws that affect, hundreds of millions of people online every day doing consensual legal work. Yeah, it's not a good combo.
And I think something interesting is that connection between sex addiction, the hype around it, and sex education is what I'm going to say, because that lack of sex education is, I think, what drives a lot of people to search out porn, which is not meant to be education.
Right.
You have a very interesting chapter in the book on cyber sex, that old term, another old term, addiction and porn addiction. And you argue that, you write, porn as addiction is a pathology of the internet age, and that prior to the internet, pornography was considered more of a victimless behavior. Can you talk a little bit about that fixation of, especially online porn, people being addicted to it, and, despite the fact that porn is so popular? I mean, it seems like the more popular it is, the more people want to pathologize it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I kind of say that it's something that came about as the internet came about, because, you didn't really hear about people getting addicted to like Playboy magazines or VHS tapes. It wasn't really a thing, because, it's not really something that they, had access to all the time. It's this thing coming into our homes that was very scary and new. And suddenly it was like, oh, people can look at porn, can sex with each other, can do like webcam sessions all the time now. And a lot of people did kind of have, really disordered reactions to that access, and that kind of broad, like sudden access to all of the porn that they could ever want, limitless varieties.
24/7.
Yeah. So yeah, it was something that people struggled with, and it was a real thing. But, to call it addiction, I think was, a way to, again, like pathologize the very kind of natural kind of desires that a lot of people have, just to feel connection, especially sexual connection. And I think a lot of the people that I read about, and the experts that I talked to who are studying this today, they would agree that, it's more about the shame that people feel around it that makes them feel like they're out of control, or they're looking at too much porn. And also, it's a lot of times something underlying that, maybe they're anxious, maybe they're depressed, maybe there's something else that they're trying to fill a need for, that they're looking at porn to do for them. And like you said, it's, a lot of people get into it early because they're looking for information about sex. They want to know how it's done. And they don't get that information in a safe way anymore. It's, they're going straight for what is meant for adults as entertainment. So, yeah.
So we've talked about some of the, I guess, the downsides, not so much of the internet, but of people's reactions to it. So I want to switch a little bit to, can you talk about what you see as the most positive advances about how the internet has changed sex and access to both sex information and sexual devices, and just ways we find sexual partners, and anything else positive about what's happening in the last, I guess 30 years, 20 years?
Yeah. It's there's a lot to kind of celebrate as far as what's happened in the last few decades with sex on the internet. I think the internet opened up new kind of worlds to people that they didn't know existed, and a lot of the times that included maybe people thought that what they were into was too weird, or that there was something wrong with them, or that they were into the wrong thing. And then suddenly they get online and they say, oh, there's like, lots of other people on here that are also into the same things that I am. Like they they agree that they find this thing hot too. Like that's so much less isolating. I think it really made people feel less alone. Yeah, and I think also the internet has done a lot to just normalize sex as work. Especially in the last 5 years or so, I guess probably 3 to 5 years. We're definitely not there yet. But you can look at like OnlyFans exploding in 2020, where people were like, we need to make money. We can't leave our house. And also people were like, we need entertainment. We can't leave our house. So yeah. And suddenly like, every other person, is on OnlyFans, which I think is fantastic. I think that's definitely a positive that's come out of the internet is, being exposed to lots of different people and lots of different sexualities, different gender expressions, different kinks, different fetishes, that people just didn't get a chance to see or talk about or consider before the internet. And it's all happened in a very short, relatively fast time. So that's, that comes with its own issues, but I think it's overall a good thing. But yeah, I always say I'm kind of a eternal optimist about this stuff. So.
There's a lot out there. Like, I think as someone who's I'm involved in the sexuality world, but not as much the tech world, like it's hard to keep up because there's so many advances. So along those lines, there's been a lot happening with AI, and you talk in the book about some of the new technologies. Do you have any advice for people looking to maybe explore that, or like AI and sex, or dating and meeting people and these virtual spaces, and how to, I guess, vet them for safety, or so that their boundaries are protected?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's it's the stuff going on with like AI right now, especially, has been really wild to follow and to cover. I would say just if you're gonna explore that route, and I actually am pretty pro those kind of things. I think it can be a really healing and helpful space to kind of explore your sexuality, in a way that you feel comfortable, and that's maybe there's not another person that's going to make you anxious or like make you feel like you're being judged or something. I think a lot of people report that that's a helpful part of like the AI chatbots, especially. But a lot of these companies that are running them, I think, the first thing that you should do is kind of look at their privacy policies, kind of figure out what they're doing with that data. If they're going to kind of keep your data safe. I think that would be my number one kind of concern. And also, I would say, there's been examples of like these companies kind of pulling the plug on their own product and saying, oh, the censorship happens to them too. And they say, oh, we can't have sex on this. Actually, you can't sex with this thing anymore, which is devastating to a lot of people. So I would say just keep that in mind. Like, it's not, because it's not, a real person, it does also have risks of like abandonment. This company could abandon you. It's just a company. So yeah, you'll be careful with that, kind of keep that grounding in mind, and, remember that it's a way to explore, but it's not the whole picture. I would always say, real people are better than the AI, but if you need to talk to an AI for a bit, that's also okay. Yeah, it's a lot out there. I think it's really going to be really interesting to see how all of this develops into, the next couple of years, because it's definitely an industry that people are interested in.
You said that you're an optimist. So I'm curious, what makes you hopeful about the future of sex tech, and are people fighting back against some of these puritanical pushes in our culture and the political sphere?
Yeah. That's probably the only thing keeping me an optimist at this point, is that people are fighting back. Sex workers themselves are doing, lobbying on Capitol Hill and going and talking to representatives and saying, hey, this is what affects us. This is actually, going to affect your constituents too. We are your constituents too. So that's been really amazing to see, as, the mobilization of people who say, you can't actually do this to our industry. This is important to us. This is how we make our living. So think more carefully about the laws you put in place. And people do push back against censorship when There's always a lot on the line, but we've seen examples like OnlyFans, threatened to get rid of all explicit content in 2021, and people said absolutely not, you can't do that. The people threatened to cancel their subscriptions. People did cancel their subscriptions. Porn performers left the platform, and then they changed their mind. The platform changed their mind and said, actually, we can figure it out with the banks, and we can make this work after all. So that was a really hopeful moment for me, is to say, when we are really loud about these things and we keep talking about them and keep spreading the word about them, things can change. So I think that's giving me the most hope right now. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be pessimistic about too. So I don't know. I don't think you can kind of cover this stuff and pay attention to these things and be researching them all the time and not feel a little bit hopeful about what the future holds. So.
And speaking of the future, what are you working on now or next, and where can people follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing journalism every day, most days at Vice. I cover this stuff every day, and in a more kind of the book was a history, but this is a more kind of newsworthy type writing, and covering. There's always something to write about in this space, as you know. And I'm on Twitter. It's probably the best way to follow my work, at Samantha Cole. And yeah, the book is anywhere books are sold, as they say. On Bookshop, I would say, is my preferred place to buy it. But yeah, it's never a dull moment in this space.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
Follow Samantha on Instagram and Twitter at Samly Cole. And her book is How Sex Changed the Internet and the Internet Changed Sex. So get that. Thanks.
Thank you.